Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Sunday morning worship service brought to you by the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of York. My name is Tesla Taliaferro. I use he, him pronouns, and I will be helping to lead our Sunday service. Our service today celebrates Pride Month. During Pride Month, people around the world, including we Unitarian Universalists, celebrate the self-affirmation, dignity, equality, and visibility of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, and other individuals as part of a social group. Pride, as opposed to shame and stigma, is one of the goals of the LGBTQIA plus civil rights movement. In particular, with anti-transgender laws being proposed and enacted across the country at a disturbing rate, our service today is a service of solidarity to the members of the transgender and gender non-conforming and non-binary community. I also serve, in addition to being the chair of the Social Justice Committee here at the UUCY, as the president of the Rainbow Rose Center, which serves York County's LGBTQI+ community. The mission of the Rainbow Rose Center is to foster an environment of inclusion, equity, and health where all members of York County's LGBTQI+ community can feel safe and welcome and thrive right here in York. Today, I will be giving you a reflection about my story as a transgender individual, and you will also be hearing the reflections of two members of the gender nonconforming community, including a board member of the Rainbow Rose Center, Mary Almy, and one of York County Pride's best performers, G.O.D. Here at the UUCY, our mission is to be a transformative faith community that serves the religious and spiritual needs of a wide and diverse group of people, a community that earns recognition as a leader in the work towards social justice and guides our children to become more engaged in the global community. As is customary, whenever Unitarian Universalists gather, we begin by lighting a candle in our chalice. Our candle flame represents the flaming chalice that is a symbol of our living tradition of our faith. We also invite everyone at home to light a candle as we share our chalice lighting words. Our chalice lighting words today are by Reverend Lori Holliban. Reverend Holliban is a minister at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Beaufort, South Carolina. We light our chalice flame for those who lived their lives in closets of shame, for those who furtively visited the bars where nobody knew your name, for the Stonewall riot and the fierce trans women who fought, for the plague which still takes far too many, too young, too soon. So many gone. So many never lived to see out gay kids singing on TV, out gay people serving in the military, marriage equality, families formed with intention. We light our chalice flame for all these and for all our siblings of the rainbow, surviving, living life out in the open with pride.
Good morning once again, everybody. Welcome to our Sunday morning worship service from the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of York. My name is Reverend Terry Cummings. I use she, her pronouns, and it's my privilege to be the minister of this congregation. And this month and this Sunday we celebrate Pride Week and gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual, queer, intersex, all other pride. Pride is, of course, the opposite of stigma. Stigma is the word that applied to our community, my community, for so many decades. And pride was a term coined in the 1960s to counter that, when people like me and others were deemed illegal. Pride marches were held, of course, prior to the Stonewall riots of 1968, but it was those riots that gave the major impetus to the Pride movement. And let us remember that early on the morning of Saturday, June 28th, 1969, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people rioted after a police raid on the Stonewall Inn, a gay bar at 43 Christopher Street in New York City, in Greenwich Village, downtown. This riot and further protests and rioting over the following nights were a watershed moment in the gay pride movement. Pride Month now serves as an annual reminder of the larger struggle in which people of our community are engaged, a struggle to protect and defend fundamental human rights against bigotry, religious conservatism, extremism, fear, hate, and ignorance. And at this moment, as we begin our worship service together, I invite you to join me in a period of meditation, silent prayer. Let the universe move through you, through your body, through your beautiful heart and your gentle, loving minds and souls. Feel the universe channel through you, through your feet, into the incredible earth below you. I ask you to share a moment of prayer or silent meditation with me. Holy One, God of many names and none, Spirit of life and love that moves through and between every one of us, we share today the joy of being together to lift up all those who are brave enough, courageous enough, authentic enough to live their lives as they were intended to live. We lift up and thank those family members, friends, parents, siblings, children who support the members of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex communities. We hope and pray that the oppression and the repression, the pain and the suffering meted out on our community for no reason can come to an end in our lifetime, and sooner than that, very soon. Holy One, protect all of us and those who support us. In your loving arms, lift us up on angels' wings. Be with us as we continue the struggle. And may those who feel hate and hope and fear in their hearts know the joy and the gifts of letting them go. And may we who are the object of hate find a way to feel forgiveness, love, and compassion for those who do not know what they do to cause harm. Holy One, Holy Spirit, hear our prayer. May it be so. Blessed be and amen. If it hadn't been for the internet, I would probably still be living in maleness. I spent a lifetime feeling that my body and my spirit and my life were completely misaligned. This was not just an experience of feeling like I was wearing the wrong clothing, although that was part of it. This was a feeling of being deeply spiritually disconnected from who I was and how I related to the world in which I moved and the expectations that were placed upon me as a boy and then as a man, as a parent and father and as a husband. So deeply disconnected to who I was inside. And like many members of the transgender community, I thought I was the only person in the world who felt that way. I looked at old newspapers from time to time on the news, and I read about people like Christine Jorgensen, a US Marine who had a sex change operation in Sweden in the 1960s. I knew of anecdotal stories like that, but I thought that I was as rare as a diamond on a beach of sand. And then the internet came along, and I discovered I wasn't alone. And I found information, and I found that there were books written about the transgender community, and I began to ask questions, and I started to see a therapist. It took several years between my first foray into seeing a therapist and my actual gender transition. And in the 50 years between the day I was born and when I started to go through that process, I did the things that many transgender people do. I bought women's clothing in secret and binged for a while, and then I threw them away feeling incredible guilt, and I thought I was the only one. But of course that is a very common behavior for members of the transgender community. The term transgender is a term used to describe people whose gender or sense of personal identity doesn't match the sex they were assigned at birth. But there are so many different variants of that. I read recently that Facebook has up to 50 different types of definition for people who identify as transgender and intersex and genderqueer and non-binary, non-conforming. I can't keep up with the list, frankly. What a wonderful spectrum of gender identities. Think of it as not so much a spectrum, but as a mosaic. Different tiles of different colors in a beautiful picture, each one different, each one its own color, its own shape, its own size. In the United States, there are roughly 1.4 million grown-ups who identify as transgender, a little over 0.5% of the population. I'm a little skeptical about that number. It's a number I found doing a search, and I'm sure it's probably many more than that, particularly if you take into account that some of our more conservative states, like North and South Dakota, have fewer than the average, and you can only just imagine that they are just people who are not yet out. I found one statistic yesterday about our state, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It's estimated that the transgender population in PA is 43,800. Again, I'm not sure about the accuracy of that number, but that's the number that I found. And in Pennsylvania, according to the data, there are 342 transgender people for every 100,000 citizens, approximately 0.34%. I don't believe it, but that's the number that I have to share with you. When I came out as trans in 2007, there were very few people. A lot of people that I came out to had never heard of the idea of transgender. I still felt like I was very unique. In the 12 or 13 years since I've been out, it seems like there's been an explosion of people going through gender reassignment and asserting their non-conforming status. Maybe the internet just started a big explosion, and we're just at the very beginning of a giant mushroom of people coming out. And it does seem like I'm not unique anymore. In fact, I'm not even remarkable. It's like, so what that I'm transgender? It's like nothing, no big deal, at least to members of the younger generation who came out after me. And it does seem that the age of initiation of going into transgender therapy and transgender surgery has been becoming lower and lower as people under 25 and even under the age of 18 are now going through gender therapy. And there are some good signs for the trans community. Several states do have protections for the transgender community in terms of employment, housing, credit and loan, schools. But unfortunately, many states do not have these protections in place. And in the wake of the 2020 presidential election, we have seen the face of oppression rise to the surface across the country in the form of voter suppression measures and a war on transgender people, and in particular, transgender youth. The trans community, of course, poses no threat to anyone, and trans and gender fluid people are among the most vulnerable and defenseless people in the world, in particular, trans people of color. But because of their vulnerability, they are fodder for the attacks by vengeful, conservative legislatures across the country. During 2021, more than 250 bills aimed at the LGBTQ community have been introduced into state legislatures, according to the Human Rights Campaign. The majority of these bills would affect transgender youth, a group that researchers and medical professionals warn is already susceptible to a very high level of suicide. Since the beginning of this year, 33 states have introduced at least 117 bills in their legislatures that aim to curb the rights of transgender people. Advocacy groups are calling 2021 a record-breaking year for oppressive legislation. 20 states have introduced bills that prohibit or impede the administration of gender-affirming therapy to people under the age of 18. One bill recently introduced in Alabama would make it a felony for medical providers to provide transition-related care to transgender minors. On April 6th of this year, Arkansas became the first state to outlaw providing gender-affirming treatment to minors, a move that the American Civil Liberties Union said would send a terrible and heartbreaking message to transgender youth across the country. Some of these bills are given misleading names. The statute in Alabama is called the Vulnerable Child Compassion and Protection Act. Obviously a misnomer. And on June the 1st of this year, the first day of Pride Month, Florida became the 8th state targeting trans athletes. All told, 31 states have introduced bills that ban transgender athletes from participating in sports consistent with their gender identities. 3 states, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Tennessee, have already signed these bills into law. Ironically, the Arkansas bill is named the Fairness in Women's Sports Act. Of course, these bills are solutions in search of a problem. There is no dominance by transgender athletes in women's sports. And several states have introduced bills that target education and ID restrictions. One Iowa bill requires that parents give written consent for teachers to discuss gender identity while their children are present in the classroom. And on and on and on and on. Based on estimates, it's estimated that 1 in 4 transgender people in the United States are being targeted by these laws for no reason other than hate. There is some good news at the federal level. On March 31st, President Biden issued the first ever federal proclamation of its kind for this year's International Transgender Day of Visibility. And on the same day, the Pentagon issued new policies to allow transgender Americans to serve openly in the military, reversing the Trump administration's ban. And there is a bill pending in Congress called the Equality Act. Many of you may have heard about that. That was introduced to Congress in February. It would amend the 1964 Civil Rights Act to explicitly include gender identity and sexual orientation as protected classes. The bill passed the House of Representatives, but who knows what will happen in the Senate. There are some issues at work in the wider world that touch on all 7 of our Unitarian Universalist principles. Issues like racial and gender equality, for example. And it seems to me sometimes that the only way Unitarian Universalists can affirm and promote our 7 principles is to confront systems, institutions, cultural norms, and people that are instruments of oppression. And nowhere is that more evident than in the struggles that many members of the LGBTQIA+ face in their daily lives. Our first Unitarian Universalist principle calls upon us to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every single person. Our second principle calls upon us to affirm and promote equity and compassion in human relations. And our third principle calls upon us to affirm and promote acceptance of one another and encouragement of spiritual growth. Members of the LGBTQ community are frequently not treated with dignity, nor with justice, nor with acceptance. They are not truly free to be themselves because of the systems of oppression that limit their freedoms. Attacks on the LGBTQ community are actually attacks on everybody. Attacks on the freedom of one person are attacks on the freedom of all, and no one is free until we're all free. Think what would happen if these statutes that have been introduced across the country to oppress and reduce trans rights get through. Where will that leave women in general, other minorities, workers, children? Everyone is at risk if laws like these get on the books. 2 years ago, I arrived here as your first openly transgender minister. It's been an interesting ride for me. It hasn't been easy. For the most part, members of this congregation have gotten my pronouns right, and there have been relatively few microaggressions and other problems that I've encountered. But it hasn't been easy or perfect. And one of my biggest regrets is that the pandemic got in the way of you, members of this congregation, and me having a deeper conversation about what it is like to be a transgender minister in a mostly straight and almost completely cisgender congregation. There is work to be done. This is not a time when, as you go into search for a new minister, where you can check the box and say, yep, we did that. We had a trans minister. There is work to be done. I say that out of love and compassion and gratitude, not out of anger or resentment. As you go into search for your new minister, the UUA will encourage you, I'm sure, to go through a process called Beyond Categorical Thinking. I strongly urge and encourage you to do that. There is a role for straight white male ministers and straight white males in general, of course. But it hasn't been lost on me these last 2 years that the only minister who served here for any length of time was a cisgender white male with a normal-looking family. And as you go into search, more than likely, you're going to be interviewing people who are from a greater diversity than that. I hope that you will undergo the training. I hope that you will not think that you can check off the box, because there is work to be done. I'm grateful for the way I have been received as a transgender minister. You've done good work these last 2 years with me, and I'm thankful for that. And there's more work to be done. And with that, I will leave this podium. We have 3 wonderful speakers today to talk about Pride Week, and I'm going to sit back and enjoy what they have to say. May it be. Amen.
Good morning. My name is Mary Almy. I am a wife, a former police officer, a retired mission co-worker of the Presbyterian Church USA, an aunt, a friend, an accountant, served in the military for 4 years. I think I said I was in law enforcement. And yes, I'm transgender. I'm a transgender woman. I grew up in the 50s. I was born in the 50s, grew up in the 60s. I was 15 years old at the time of the Stonewall riots. 15 years into knowing that I was different and being rejected by a society that had made who I was illegal at the time. Raised by parents who struggled when I told them who I truly was, told by them and by so many others that I was not who I was. In fact, to the point where when I would mention it, or when I would try to express myself, I would be punished physically, sometimes mentally. There was a time I remember when I was caught being dressed in what I thought was a very nice outfit. I thought I looked very nice. My mother caught me and took me up to the bedroom, and in those days, capital punishment for children was an okay, proper way. And I still carry the scars from the belt that tried to straighten me out and to teach me that this was a phase, a bad phase to go through. Again, this was in the 50s and 60s. I had no mentors. I had no way of telling people. I just knew. I knew within my heart, within my soul, who I was, but nobody else would believe that. Nobody else could understand that. When I was in 8th grade, I remember I started going through what every young person of male biology does, and my hair started coming out, and I hated it. And I remember going to gym class one day after I had shaved my legs the night before, and I ended up getting assaulted. Lesson learned, you don't go into a male gym with all the teenage testosterone going on, being different. I ended up being assaulted and hospitalized and being told by a family member that I wish I was dead. I learned early on that being in a closet was the place to be, but it was hard to be in a closet. I reached out to a church pastor where I was very active in. I thought maybe my faith would work. And the pastor called me evil and told me I was going to hell and told me I needed to pray this devil away. So I went home and I prayed, and nothing changed. And actually I started to negotiate with the God I knew. And I said, God, if you would make me a woman tomorrow, just imagine how popular you would be. Everybody would believe in you again. Well, I learned quickly, too, that God doesn't work that way. So I went and did what I thought I had to do to survive. I went to the complete opposite end of the spectrum. I became super macho. I did everything that a real man's man would do. I joined the military. I joined the military police and became a rapid response team leader. I was a SWAT team leader. I took on all the dangerous assignments that they could give me. When I got out, I got in law enforcement, and I did the same thing because I wanted to die. But I was too afraid to take my own life. I didn't want to hurt my family. So I would do things in a job that were extremely dangerous, hoping that maybe I would lose my life and be a hero, and they wouldn't be ashamed of me anymore. They wouldn't hate me. I grew up this way. I regret it deeply now, but it was what I had to do to survive. I ended up getting married to a really wonderful woman who just amazed me from the beginning. And when I didn't know what else to do, I had diarrhea of the mouth. Because I was out on a date with her, and for the first time in my life, I told somebody else. And the only thing I could say was I like to dress in women's clothes. Now, this woman happened to be an ordained Presbyterian minister, and I thought, this relationship is done. I mean, who's going to go be with me after this? And she looked at me, and her comment to me was, that's nice. Doesn't do anything for me, but that's nice. And that was it. I ended up marrying this lady. And in the process of our marriage, she decided that we needed to go into mission work. And so I became a mission co-worker, and it was there that the God I knew spoke to me. It was there that I had a vision of God wrapping me in God's arms and telling me, Mary, I love you. This was in the 70s, or the 80s, 90s, I'm sorry, yeah. See, I don't even remember how old I was anymore. But it was in the 90s, and there was a time when the church was struggling with the LGBTQ issue. And all my leadership was telling me that gays and trans were killing the church. And I would sit there and cry because I was telling people in a foreign country that I believed that the universe and that God loved them, being told that God hated me. I became suicidal, tried to kill myself several times, even by jumping into a river with crocodiles, and sometime if we ever get to meet in person, I'll tell you that story. But it also came to be a time when I needed help. And I found a scripture passage that for me spoke. It was Psalm 139, verse 13. And it says, for it was you, God, who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise for you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. God, the universe, God created me. God knew I was trans. God knew my name. I don't care now what society thinks. To the most part, I know who I am. I did transition in 2011, and I lost my family. My only sibling wants me dead. I haven't seen my nieces and nephews on that side of my family since then. But I have gained a family of choice, and my wife's family has accepted me, and I have their love and their support. And now we come to today, 10 years after I transitioned, and we still fight some of the same battles. Society still tells me I'm evil. Society will still tell me that I'm bad. Christian churches, many of them, will still tell me that I'm going to hell. They're passing laws that we had talked about earlier, trying to make my life and other lives more miserable. There are places passing laws where medical practitioners can allow me to die because they can't treat me, because they disagree with who I am. We have a long way to go. But there are signs of hope. I have friends who are working within the community and trying to make a difference. I know people now, young people, who are transitioning, who have parents who support them and love them and fight for them. I remember the first time I met one. I was on a board of a transgender program that was in Albany, New York, and we were holding a seminar, and this woman came in with this little girl, maybe 9 or 10 years old, and she said, can we come and join and be part of the seminar? I said, of course. We love to train and teach you. I didn't know the little girl was a transgender girl. And I cried when I found out because Mom was supportive. I cry today when I find supportive parents or supportive siblings. I think the important thing, though, as we work through this in this society we're living in today, what I want to take away is what I said in the beginning. I am a lot of things, and being a trans woman is a small part of who I am. I am a good friend. I am an aunt. You'd have to ask my nieces and nephews how good I am at that, but I am an aunt. I am a wife. I am an accountant. I am on the board of the Rainbow Rose Center. I love to go canoeing and camping. I love to cook. I build model airplanes. I do a lot of things. And I am a trans woman living amongst you, wanting to be there, caring about what happens to you, hoping and wishing someday the society would really truly care about what happens to us.
Hi again, everyone. As you all know, my name is Tesla Taliaferro, and this is my 4-year anniversary of coming out as a transgender individual. I woke up this morning trying to decide what to put on, knowing that I needed to color my beard because many of you contributed to the Rainbow Rose Center's Give Local York, and we reached our goal. So that was my guarantee to the community that I would dye my beard. So that was the one thing I had set. But when I did this service, the Pride service 2 years ago, I know I dressed up in a dress shirt, and I had on my trans tie, and I had planned to wear that again. But I woke up this morning and realized I had come out 4 years ago, and going to my closet, I saw this shirt, which I had purchased right before coming out because it reminded me of David Bowie. And he is a god forever. And this is what I wore when I went to my first Pride event in Denver, Colorado. And I didn't wear the same top because I just wore a sports bra because I didn't own a binder yet. But I went and I was with the Peak Area Gender Expression Group, or PAGE, that I had just met a couple weeks beforehand. And I had gone there because my spouse, at the time my husband, was very understanding when all of a sudden one night I blurted out, "I never wanted to be a woman." And he looked at me lovingly and said, "You know, there's support groups for that." And I said, "What?" And there just happened to be one in our hometown. And so I went. And I came home from that meeting that day and I said, I know who I am. And I've always known. I just never had the words. I knew from the time when I was 2.5 years old and going to Sunday school, and they were lining up the little boys and the little girls to go to their bathrooms, and I always got in the boys' line. And I knew growing up, before I hit puberty, when I always had to play the dad or the male role in whatever game, make-believe game we were playing. And then I knew when I hit puberty, and I hit the wrong puberty. And I can tell you, I grew up in a conservative household. We had 6 couples in the neighborhood that were gay or lesbian, and I never knew those terms until high school because they were always just people living in sin. So trans was way outside my vocabulary. And we never saw images of naked people because of the household I grew in, but when I hit puberty, I knew that I needed to start wearing socks in my underwear so I could feel whole. And wearing, at the time, ace bandages, which is very bad, don't do that, to try and suppress the top. And it got so bad, I was so depressed, my mom took me to a plastic surgeon. And they thought that I was there because I didn't like the way my breasts looked. And I just kept looking at the surgeon and saying, no, that's not the issue. The issue is they're here. And we lived in the city that Focus on the Family was at, home base in Colorado Springs, and he knew. Because I saw the way he looked at my mom. And I could tell he wanted to say something, or could have said something, and chose not to. But I was growing so quickly at the time. My mom, we couldn't afford a lot of clothing, but she felt the need for me to always wear clothing that looked good on me. So I could never have pants that were an inch too thin or whatever. And I grew 6 inches in 6 months. So it was a lot of clothes that we were going through. And eventually she just had to start going to Goodwill. And they didn't have the size for me except in men's pants. And so she brought home a pair of men's cargo pants, and I kept them in my backpack so I could change into them when I got to school. She thought I lost them because she never saw them in the laundry because I just wore them every day. So when I came out, a lot of people say I'm still the same person, I just changed names. I did the opposite. I kept my name, and I changed who I was. As a woman, I was selfish and self-centered and really only cared about my life. And when I came out, I recognized that my life is a very small part of this universe. It's huge in my life, obviously, but my life is here to serve other people, which when I was given the opportunity to become a leader in the community as the president of the Rainbow Rose Center, and here especially getting a head start here at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of York as the head of social justice, I took it. And I feel very privileged to be a role model to the community. I love being here, and I love serving, and I love the people that are in my life, and I love all of you. And thank you for your affirmation, because when I walked into this church, having moved from Colorado, and those opening words of, no matter your gender, whomever you love, you are welcome here. I was standing over there, and I melted into a puddle on the floor, and no one really noticed, but I decided this was the congregation for me. And I've struggled with that a little bit since, and especially during the pandemic, but I still feel at home here, and especially here in the York community, and I'm glad to be here, and I'm grateful to be here. So thank you for your affirmation, for your love, for your acceptance, and I want to challenge you, because our faith is a faith of action and not just words. We need people to be calling their senators, to be calling their representatives, to get the marriage equality is gone. Like, it was never the fight. That's not what we were here for. We were here for equal rights, and we're still fighting that fight. Just like in Stonewall, that wasn't about marriage equality, that was about police brutality. We're still having that fight in 2020 and 2021. Please help us pass the Equality Act. Help us shut down House Bill 291 for protecting women in Sports Act here in Pennsylvania that's trying to get the trans community out of women's sports. Just help stand with this community.
Draw the G.O.D, actually. The generator, operator, and destroyer of everything. That's me. And to a lot of people, that sounds really like convoluted, conflated, and I've heard the words blasphemous used before, but I heard Tesla say that he kept his name and changed who he was. I changed my name, and I began to fight for everything that I was. I didn't become Jah the God because I wanted control or power over other people or over other things. I just wanted what was mine. I wanted to be in control over the world that I perceive behind my two eyes. I've lived a life where a lot of my agency has been taken away from me by men, by society, by religious dogma, and by my family. A lot of my life has been lived through the lens of art. I remember being four years old, the first time I ever saw Sailor Moon on TV. And she was just this average girl who cried over everything. Everything was so hard, everything was so challenging, everything just absolutely befuddled her. And when she needed to, though, she would transform, she would pull it together, and she would be strong, not only for herself, but for the people around her, the people that cared about her, and the people that she cared about. And I knew then that I wanted to be someone like that. As she danced across my screen, covered in glitter and sparkles, it was kind of fabulous. There was that part too. But even then, I knew I did view a lot of my world through the lens of femininity. And to me, there was nothing wrong with that, but society said, yeah, there kind of is. You can't dress like that. You can't look like that. For me, it's been a you can't even look like that. My face has always been my face. No matter how much makeup I put on, anything like that, people have been very ugly to me just for having this face, for speaking with a soft voice. We hadn't even got as far as my identity. In maybe 2017, I don't know, I finally started thinking about a lot of these things, about my views about art, about my views about my femininity, about my views about just who I was. I never had the language. I never had the words. I never had the verbiage. And on top of that, even if I did, I would have been told to be silent. So around that time, I just began to ask myself these questions. Who am I? Who is it that I want to be? And around that time, I started actually making music. I started recording the songs that I was writing, and somehow I just started dressing like this, because this too was the peak and the pinnacle of my expression. This too was a part of that art that I wanted to share with the world. It just so happened that it's also me. Honestly, becoming Jah the God saved my life. I lived a tiny, envious life. I wanted to be straight. I wanted to be masculine. I wanted to be normal. I wanted to have regular interests. I wanted to have a regular voice. I wanted to have a regular face. I wanted to have a regular life. I wanted to be like everybody else. And the saddest, most painful thing that I discovered is that I can only be me. I woke up one day and I just decided I just don't like who I am. I don't like this person that I wake up and go out into the world as every day. This person that's uncomfortable in everything that they put on, that never feels like they look right, this person that changes outfits 5 to 6 times a day because just none of it is right, none of it is good enough, none of it makes me feel okay. Even today, this dress that I have on is the first dress I ever purchased, and I'm 20-something years old. And honestly, it was the most liberating thing ever. To go out into the world in my little black dress and be me. For me, I don't really know what my transition looks like. I wouldn't say that I thought about it that far. I just kind of think about it as it comes, day by day, you know, when it's on the to-do list. But I just know whatever my transition looks like, I want to come out on the other end of it as me. I am G.O.D, the G.O.D, generator, operator, and destroyer of everything that is me, and I am currently creating me. Thank you.
We recognize we're running a bit long today, and we want to thank everyone for sticking around, because we have come to that moment in our service when we ask you to make a financial contribution to our church. Your generosity helps defray UUCY's operating expenses and also helps our organization or help out other organizations in our community that are engaged in the work that is in keeping with our Unitarian Universalist principles and values. Our Share the Plate partner during the month of June is the Pennsylvania Immigration Resource Center, or PIRC. PIRC is a nonprofit organization which provides free legal aid to detainees in York County and Berks Family Detention Center. PIRC worked with UUCY to support our previously sponsored immigrant now living in Harrisburg. A group of us were fortunate enough to gather in the Labyrinth last Tuesday to hear his story. PIRC also serves immigrants in Pennsylvania who are victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and other violent crimes, and provides assistance with the naturalization process in order to become U.S. citizens. We ask that you please be as generous as you can. No donation is too small. Your financial gifts will be used wisely and well.
Hi, everybody. So I'm going to play you one of my brand new songs. It's called Girl or Boy, and it is in response to one of the most common questions that I get, which is, are you a girl or a boy? And I want you all to know, too, because I see a lot of you trying to defend me when people are like, is that a girl or a boy, or that looks like a boy, or he sounds like a girl, or whatever. And I want you to know that I actually welcome those questions and comments, because I hope that I am causing people to question, you know, what does it mean to be a girl? What does it mean to be a boy? Beyond just the biological definition of female and male, you know, why do we think that girls are supposed to be this way and boys are supposed to be this way? So anyway, I think we're all special and different, so here's my song. Is that a girl or is that a boy? Do they play with dolls or do they play with toys? I have to know the pink or blue now. How will people think of you if they don't know how? Girl or boy? Girl or boy? Is that a lady or is that a man? Times have changed and lines are blurred and I don't understand. I have to get a grip of this, it's blowing my mind. I am not life is not a pink or blue painting hanging over someone's crib while they're waiting to grow to be one or the other, living to please and appease their mother. And I hope we can grow to see that everybody is unique. And I know they told us when we were kids, but we forget it 'cause they also said don't be a pussy to the boy who cried. And they also said to the girl who fought, that's not very ladylike. Well, we gotta know who decides it. You or do who decides it? Do you or girl or boy, girl or boy, girl or boy, girl or boy, girl or boy. So there's that.
Be diminished. May it be so. Thank you so much. And please enjoy our final hymn, number 170. We're a gentle, angry people.
We invite those at home who lit their own chalice candle to extinguish it at this time as we read aloud the words for extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Thank you, Reverend.
And our closing words today are a poem by Audre Lorde, A Litany for Survival. For those of us who live at the shoreline, standing upon the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone. For those of us who cannot indulge the passing dreams of choice, who love in doorways, coming and going in the hours between dawns, looking inward and outward, at once before and after, seeking a now that can breed futures, like bread in our children's mouths, so their dreams will not reflect the death of ours. For those of us who were imprinted with fear like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk, for this weapon, this illusion of some safety to be found, the heavy-footed hope to silence us. For all of us, this instant and this triumph, we were never meant to survive. And when the sun rises, we are afraid. It might not remain when the sun sets, we are afraid. It might not rise in the morning. When our stomachs are full, we are afraid of indigestion. When our stomachs are empty, we are afraid we may never eat again. When we are loved, we are afraid love will vanish. When we are alone, we are afraid love will never return. And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive. Audrey Lorde. Thank you for staying with us this long hour and a half of worship. Our worship is ended. Our service now begins. We'll see you next week